Good afternoon, buenas tardes, and thank you for tuning in. On behalf of all of us at the locally based, independently owned bookstore Books and Books in Miami, Florida, and in partnership with Miami Book Fair, it's my pleasure to welcome you to a virtual afternoon with Laurence Leamer to discuss Capote's Women, a true story of love, betrayal, and a swan song for an era, published by our friends at Putnam. Laurence Leamer is the New York Times bestselling author of Madness Under the Royal Palms. And here's Julia, who popped in ahead of time. So let me bring Larry out too. So I'm not just.
Hey,
Hi.
how you doing?
Okay, so to finish the intro here,
Sorry.
Larry Leamer is the New York Times bestselling author of Madness Under the Royal Palms and The Kennedy Women, among many other books. He lives in Washington, D.C. and Palm Beach, Florida. And to moderate this afternoon's conversation, we're joined by Julia Cooke, a journalist and travel writer. Her writing has been anthologized in the Best American Travel Writing and Best Women's Travel Writing collections. And she's the author of Come Fly the World, The Jet Age Story of the Women of Pan Am, and The Other Side of Paradise, Life in the New Cuba. So throughout this afternoon's broadcast, you're invited to ask questions by posting them in the Ask a Question feature at the bottom of the screen. And I want to remind everyone watching that you can order your copy of Capote's Women from Books and Books below. And we truly appreciate every order and the generous donations from viewers everywhere. And now, without further ado, I'd like to welcome our guest to the virtual stage, and I will disappear. Here you are.
Hello.
Hey,
Thank
Julie.
you. Hi, Larry.
Hi.
Thank you, Christina. Thanks for having me to talk to Larry about this awesome book. I'm so excited to ask a whole bunch of questions. Larry, I'm going to start pretty basic with my questions, and I'm hoping that it inspires some of you in the audience to ask some questions of your own. This subject is just so juicy and multifaceted, and there are so many layers to what Larry wrote. And I'm hoping that some of you get inspired to pop in and ask a question. So without further ado, Larry, can you tell me, how did this book come to be?
Well, I have a friend, Susie Zirinsky. Did you ever see the broadcast news, the movie years ago? And
I didn't.
Okay, but there's this feisty, idealistic reporter, and it's her story, and it was a big hit, and she was at CBS forever, and I knew her. She's a good friend of mine, and she became the first woman president of CBS News. I thought,
wow.
gee, I'll write a book about it. And I called her, and she said, well, I want to think about this, and I said, I'm not going to do it unless you want to cooperate. So I was reading a book by William F. Paley, the founder of CBS, and I started reading about his wife, Babe Paley. And I found her so much more interesting. And that led me to the other women called the Swans, that were Truman Capote's friends. And it led me to this incredible story.
That's amazing. Yeah, she was fascinating. It's so interesting because she and the other Swans they're this in-between level between the super famous people that you've written about, like Johnny Carson and the Kennedys, and then regular people who are the people that I'm much more accustomed to writing about, like just the stewardesses that I wrote about for my book. So I'm so curious to hear from you. What was that like to be? What are some of the specific challenges of writing about that rarefied world that's inhabited by rich and famous icons of politics and pop culture?
Well, you have to identify with them. I mean, people ask me, how do you do an interview? You've got to find something positive, something in that person that you can identify with, and then you can get and you can learn stuff from them. And that's what I did with all these people. I found, somebody asked me a few days ago about what would I say to Truman if I saw him, and I said I'd say I love you. Okay, because I have that feeling of love toward. I mean, I know all those faults. I know them extremely well. I just have a feeling of love for him. Okay, and it's not that I pull back on anything. I don't.
Yeah. So what were the things that you identified with in the different women? I'm so curious.
I mean, it's so easy to put them down. There's these sort of worthless women who are concerned with dress and style. And as Truman said, he thought they'd created, this was their art form. Their art form was it wasn't just clothes. It was this incredible image that they presented to the world. And as Truman realized, it was not an easy thing to do. I mean, anorexia was the occupational disease of the Swans. Okay, and you look at the photos in my book, and like Gloria Guinness. Picture of her, she's 60 years old. And look at this woman; she looks about 20 years old. That's the price they paid to do that. And I admired that anybody that does that tries hard and works at something. And I agree. I'm with Truman. It was a kind of art form, and it lasted for one generation, and it's gone. And I think it had a kind of impact in ways people don't even realize. In 1962, I worked for the Watchir, Iowa Patriot College. Went to Antioch College, and as a work study program for 3 months in this little town. And the young men in high school wore blue jeans and white T-shirts, and they wanted to be like their dads. They wanted to be farmers. The young women, they went to J.C. Penney's, which is a very important institution in those years, that knocked off the dresses the Swans wore. And these women, they saw in the newspapers about the Swans, so they wore these clothes. To them, they were upscale clothes. They didn't want them to be farmers' wives. They wanted a different life. So it had an impact on them. It was political. It was just before Betty Friedan, but dressing that way to these women was a political statement, and that's one impact the Swans had. Women identified with them, and women saw what they did and just loved what they did.
That's fascinating. You're so right that the clothes were a way of empowering themselves, and the way that it moved from this rarefied world of the icons of politics and pop culture down to normal people.
And mind you, women tend, I know my wife so much for this, women tend to dress for other women. Men think they're dressing for them. No, they're dressing for other women.
Absolutely accurate. So what were some of the details? You know, one of the things that I loved the most about this book was the level of detail that you brought to it. You know, you seemed to really enjoy describing what they wore and how they interacted with each other and the social customs, and which I found fascinating. So I'm curious to hear, what were some of the things that you associated with each of the women in terms of the details that you brought up?
Well, Babe Paley, who's on the cover of the book, and you look at the picture the first time and just look at it again and see how there's a sadness there. There's incredible sadness. When she was 17 years old, it was an automobile accident, and she had to have plastic surgery, and she lost her teeth. So she had false teeth. When she was married to Paley, who treated her really with disdain, because he was the one with the money and the power. She slept in a different bed than he did. She got up in the, she put in her teeth, and she dressed and put up her makeup. Spent a long time doing that before she went out that door to even see her husband. That fascinated with me.
Yeah.
Gloria Guinness, who was Mexican woman, who ended up, it's an incredible story. She marries this Dutch superintendent of a company in Mexico first. That lasts a couple of years. She ends up in Paris, and she's obviously knockout gorgeous. And she says, all you need is one black dress. That's maybe she spent $1.5 million for clothes later on, but then one black dress was enough to get you everywhere you wanted to go. And she, like so many of these women, wanted to marry a rich man. And that's one of the themes of their lives. That was the theme of Edith Wharton's great novels in the Gilded Age. And they all wanted to find rich men. And she found a German duke. When he went off to fight in World War II on the Russian front, she began an affair with the Nazi spy chief, and go out every night to all these parties. She left. He got her out of when the bombing got too bad in Berlin. He got her out of there, and she was in Spain. She had 2 kids. She's 40 years old, and she meets Lowell Guinness, one of the richest men in the world, and marries him. And he again treats her with great disdain. I mean, he had the jewels. The jewelry was not in his name, but in the company name to kind of hide them. When they go out, he opened the safe and she put the jewels on. When they came back, she'd take them off and they go back in the safe. And that was a metaphor for her life.
It's so interesting because Gloria Guinness in particular, that comment about the black dress and then the image of the jewels, they're just 2 totally opposed perspectives. Because to me, the black dress, that statement is such a empowering statement. It's exactly. It's amazing. It shows great domination of what it means to be stylish and what that can give to you and how little you actually need to be stylish. But then the idea of being lent those jewels, it's so the opposite of empowering.
Well, she wanted to be she'd written a novel and she had written a play that was going to be in the West End in London, and her husband wouldn't let her do it because he wanted all the attention to be on him. And so she just turned a bit away from this. And in the 60s, she did a column for Harper's Bazaar that won the award as the top fashion journalist in America, and it was very interesting stuff. And the piece that I found most intriguing is her thesis of how the world advances. It advances because men want beautiful women. So women have to get themselves as beautiful. And the men work very hard to get the money so they can have a rich woman. And that makes the world go round. That was her theory of life.
Yeah, you wrote really interestingly about how that then collided with the political movement that was about to come into full force, the second wave of feminism, and the ways that wasn't quite of the time.
Plus the hippies and the dress style. Each person created their own style.
Yeah,
they didn't like this. They looked down on this. It was very hard for these women to understand what had happened.
I'm sure it was an indictment of their whole life, the life that they'd constructed.
Right.
It must have been really hard. So I was going to ask you, as far as all of these details, on a more writerly level, you really embraced what Truman called the life force of beauty, with all of these details that you included. I'd love to hear how you constructed that world, how you found and decided among all of the many gorgeous details of fashion and design that you included.
Well, I wish I could say. I mean, it's probably the same thing with you. There's no great calculated way of doing this. You just get there and you're doing it, and you work on it. You think you just work on it, and suddenly it's just there in a way. I mean, the most difficult thing in this book was it reads seamlessly now, I think. Okay, but it took a lot, and each chapter is on one of the Swans. And a little bit of Truman's life in each one. And it doesn't seem, I don't think it seems like a mechanistic device. It seems inevitable, the perfect way to do it. And that took an awful lot of work and a wonderful editor.
I'm sure. Yeah, it reads seamlessly.
Yeah.
We go from meeting Truman to meeting all of these different women. And then at the end, the climax brings them all together in a way, even though they're not actually all together. It really does. When he publishes, well, anyway, I'm getting ahead of myself. It brings brings it all together. But anyway, I was going to say that the detail that I loved so much was that your description of Truman and CZ Guest's road trip from the East Coast to Palm Springs in '68. I came to think of CZ Guest as being defined by both this hauteur of the photo in her in Palm Beach, but then also the really casual panache and style of eating chili dogs and drinking Chateau Lafite. So now that you're so familiar with these women, what are the things that you take away from your own research and from writing this book?
About the women, you mean?
Yeah, and about Truman's relationship with each of them.
Okay. First of all, I'm a child of the '60s, okay, and I would always dress very casually, and I was very disdainful of people who dress like that, okay. Now, for some reason, I live in Palm Beach, and the last person who should be in Palm Beach, believe me, but I'm there. And my wife and I had dinner a few months ago at Café l'Europe, who's like one of the top restaurants there. I walk in, and these two, I can't say fat. I'm going to say obese. Whatever. These two husky men. I'll put it that way. And they're wearing shorts and flip flops and t-shirts, and they're sitting here eating these enormous meals. Okay, they're really gross. And the table next to me, like 10 people, and they had a lot to drink, and they're talking very loud. And again, they're just dressed in jeans and things like that. So the manager comes to me and starts talking to me. I said, what's happened here? And he said, well, we're losing too much business with their dress code. This is on the way we can survive. So that world is totally gone. And what is bewildering to me is, what do people do with all these exquisite clothes? Where do they wear them? There's almost no one where to wear them anymore, right?
It's true.
And I know a guy. I know he's a billionaire in Palm Beach, and he looks like a total bum. If you saw him walking down Worth Avenue, you'd give him $1.
Hmm. So about this, so now moving on to Truman,
Right.
and his attraction to this world of glamour. You know, there's something. Glamour exists as a construct to make people want to be a part of it, right? That sense of effortlessness. So there's something, to some degree, we can all understand why Truman would have been attracted to the Swans. But why do you think he was so intent on befriending these women and ingratiating himself with their circle and becoming actual friends with some of them?
He's a tiny 5'2" gay man from a little town, Monroeville, Alabama, with his squeaky little voice and flamboyantly gay, coming to New York. He barely has a high school education. Imagine, he's totally self-educated, and he ingratiated with women. His whole life is to ingratiate himself first with editors of these magazines and then these women. But he loved to be with women. And many heterosexual men, they want to sleep with women, but they're not interested in them. Okay, they don't want to talk to them really. Truman loved women. He loved talking to them, and he loved beauty. He totally loved beauty, and he couldn't buy these great paintings to have one of these great houses, but he truly loved beauty and wanted to be around it.
Yeah. So why do you think he wanted to write about it?
Because you know what a writer is. Everything is your subject. You're constantly thinking, you're constantly observing. What are you going to do with this? He was like that, and he saw that. He thought he could write a masterpiece about it. Okay, and I think he could have. I mean, some people say, how can you write a masterpiece about these spoiled rich women? Well, Edith Wharton didn't do bad, and Marcel Proust didn't do bad, writing about the elite worlds of their time. And so he really could have done that. And he had the genius. I mean, look, you and I are both observant. When we go into a room, it's not that we never turn it off. We're always looking at things, okay? But Truman was 10 times observant. Truman missed nothing. Wherever he went, he was just overwhelmed. He'd be sitting talking to you, and you're having this conversation, and you think he's totally interested in you. But at the same time, he's not missing anything in that room. That's Truman.
It really makes me think about all of the current conversations around the ethics around friendship and
Right.
mining your friends for your art. Where does the line lie between turning your friends into your fiction? I'm thinking about the recent story, Bad Art Friend, in the Times Magazine, and the current discussions of autofiction and how where does that line lie? Right. Which I found really interesting. Like this book represents the kind of the genesis of all of those conversations that are being had now.
Exactly.
It would have been such a betrayal for him to actually have published yet more of Answered Prayers.
Well, no. I think it depends how he wrote it. If he wrote a masterpiece that would live forever, immortal book, and he's had negative characters based on these women in their lives, I think would they want to be immortal? Fine. But he didn't write that. He wrote this tawdry, gossipy thing. Who'd want to be in that?
Exactly. Yeah, totally.
And why he did that's the question that is very hard to answer. Why he couldn't figure out quite how to do this. And if I had known him, I would have said, Truman, look, man, you can't. You got to block. You can't do it. What you got to do is you got to go back and write the story of your failure to write this book. Write about the women that way. Just forget it. You'll have your great book if you do that.
What do you think that would have looked like? That's a fascinating idea.
Well, it would have been his involvement, his tortured analysis of them, his positive and negative feelings toward them. His striving to create something he's unable to create. I think it's fascinating.
Well, and the universality of trying, exactly. Like his parallels. There are so many parallels with Gloria Guinness, even just from what you were saying in terms of her, being offered to do these really. She was so ambitious, and she was offered to do these really interesting things, and then couldn't. The life that she'd constructed for herself wouldn't allow her to do the things that she actually wanted to do.
Now, most of these women were highly intelligent.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you can tell.
But that was the world. Look at Holly Golightly in Breakfast at Tiffany's. Mm-hmm. Okay, she comes from this little town in Texas. She wants to marry a rich man. She gets in trouble. I mean, and the movie is a disgrace as far as I'm concerned. It isn't, and Truman couldn't stand it. It has nothing to do with the story. It just took all the darkness out of this tale, and the darkness was the essence of it. So the end of the novella, she was involved with this corrupt businessman, so she has to leave the United States. So what does she do when she's leaving? The day she's leaving, does she want a phrase book of Portuguese phrases to help her when she gets there? No, she wants a list of the 50 richest men in Brazil, because she wants to find one.
Yeah, it's such a dark propulsion into her next phase, huh?
Right, and it's looking for a rich man or successful man. It happened all over America. And that wasn't just these women who were marrying these richest men in America. You could be in a small town in America. You were looking for the rich guy in town to marry him, and to marry him even if you weren't going to be happy.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting. So the book has been getting great reviews. One of the reviews that I loved was from a critic at LitHub who wrote that, I'm going to quote, "Leamer's well-researched book is not focused on offering a cautionary tale, but peeling back the disguises that we all use to camouflage our true selves from the public." How did writing this book impact the way you think about exactly what this critic was saying, the disguises that we all use to camouflage our true selves from the public?
Well, let me just say something about the reviews that the book is getting. What I'm proudest of is it brings out the best in these writers. They look at this book and they have such insight into it, okay? I mean, it just kind of amazes me. I mean, the trouble they put to do this. People want to think that publishing is gone and the good editors and the good publishers are gone and people don't work that hard. But it goes on. It's just so part of us. In fact, I've never seen a time when there are more good books as there are now. And these kinds of essays these people write, I mean, they're just exquisite. It just happens in my book they're writing about, but it's just the device they use to write.
Yeah, I find that really interesting also. Well, so the concept of disguises, were you thinking about that consciously as you were constructing this world? As
a gay man, that was a disguise. I mean, in a way. I mean, what courage he had. I mean, I had a friend in World War II who was an officer in the Navy, and in the Pacific, his job was to find groups of gays and put them in prison. Okay, that was the world that Truman was in. He could have been beaten up on the street. It happened to so many gays, and yet he wasn't political, but his life was political, and he just stood up for himself. He's a daring person. Yeah,
for sure. Another thing that I loved about the book was the quotes from the women themselves. They're Cece Guess, as you can tell, one of my favorites, you quote her as saying that style is about surviving, about having been through a lot and making it look easy, which certainly ties in with how I think about glamour. Glamour is the construction of that effortlessness. It was a huge part of my book and writing about the stewardesses of the same era. So what do you think the value of glamour is?
I think it just makes our lives more interesting. I think we should applaud it, basically. And so much of it is gone. It's to me, it's unfortunate.
Yeah. How do you think the expectation of that glamour? You say so much of it is gone. So what do you think that means for today?
Well, first of all, nobody is going to take most women of that. They have their own careers, right? They don't have the endless hours these women had to present this persona. So that's different, and so I don't know, but I still think there's much to learn from these women, just to look at them. And I think Truman is right that they are their own art. And when you look at the pictures of them in my book, that's the best of them. That's how they want to be remembered. That's what they created. And as Truman says, there are very few women there were probably one of a dozen women could be in that category. Okay, that's what's interesting to me too. And each was so unique, and some of them were just fiercely intelligent.
Yeah, I mean, it makes me think about the fact that part of what the betrayal of the tawdry chunks of answered prayers that he did publish, that one Esquire piece. Part of the betrayal of that was the way that it punctured that sense of effortlessness or that facade. in a not in a appreciative way, but rather in a gossipy, mean sort of way.
Well, he's an egomaniac,
Mm-hmm.
and as an egomaniac, he's totally isolated.
Mm-hmm.
He has no real friends. He's looking at everybody and in some ways putting down everybody in the world except for himself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, so what do you think would have happened if he had published more?
Depends on what he published. If he had published the same tawdry stuff that was in those excerpts, his reputation would have gone down. But if he'd published the book he could have written and should have written, we'd be remembering him on a whole different level. We wouldn't be talking about these last few years of dissipation and drugs. We'd be remembering this magnificent, one of the great American authors of all time.
Mm-hmm. Why do you think he just couldn't get there?
I don't know. I mean, to me, writer's block to me is when you're looking at the wrong thing. The way to get rid of writer's blocks is you're looking at the wrong problem in the wrong way. Just forget that. Go to another problem. Look at it another way. Somehow I don't think he ever could do that. And celebrity is such a curse. You know, I was down in Key West doing this thing that's going to be in PBS in December, and we went to the Hemingway house and went up to Hemingway's the study where he got up and he wrote, and even if no matter much of his drinking, what he was doing the night before, he's up at dawn, he climbs those stairs and he sits by himself and he writes 600 to 800 words. That's a writer's life. And in this program they have a little quote from a little tiny video of Hemingway and him saying that a writer writes. That's what you do, and you shouldn't. And I shouldn't be talking to you because that's not what I do. I write. And when celebrity overcomes that,
yeah,
it just overwhelms you. You don't have the solitude you need.
Well, and Hemingway is such an interesting case study because he was such a celebrity,
right?
But he maintained that level of discipline through the celebrity.
He definitely did. And Truman did. He'd be lying in bed reading movie magazines, and the phone would ring, and he'd tell the person on the phone that he's working on answered prayers.
Which is tragic.
Yep.
It's so sad.
After all that he did, and all that he gave, and the more that he could give.
It's funny because at some point toward the end of the book, I started thinking that Truman didn't want to write answered prayers. He wanted to construct the world of answered prayers to live in it, in a way.
Yeah, well, he did want to be, but he wasn't. He was an interloper. He was there. He was there as an entertainer. Wherever he went, he had to tell the jokes, have the anecdotes. Now, when he started doing that, and he's this little guy in these places, in these homes for the first time, it must have been extremely exciting for him to do that. But after a while, here you come, Truman. We clap our hands. That's what you got to do. That's your job. You're the center of entertainment, Truman. No matter how you feel, no matter how depressed you are, that's your role. Yeah,
which makes me think of that line about all the disguises that we all wear in public. That became his public disguise in a way.
Right. Exactly.
It's interesting. So, what was your favorite part about writing this book?
My favorite part. Look, I wrote it during the pandemic. I mean, I just love to enter somebody else's life. I mean, I just go on life, you know. I'm going to have my 80th birthday at the end of the month. So I've written 18 books. I've entered all kinds of different lives, not just celebrities, all different kinds of books I've written. And that it's such a pleasure to enter the lives and to identify. When I wrote Kennedy Women, which is a 900-page book and took me 5 years to write, people said afterwards, I can't believe, I don't think you wrote that. A woman would have had to written that book. And to me, that was the highest compliment that I'd gotten that. Hopefully I'd gotten that right. So that's a pleasure to me. And it's a pleasure. This is a world I didn't know before. I knew some of it because of living in Palm Beach. I know the lives of wealth, and I'm sure some of that is in there. And I knew from the Kennedys, I knew another aspect of wealth and power. And those all informed what I wrote in the book. But I was fascinated with each one of these women.
It's interesting. I was looking at the notes in the back of the book, of course, which is one of my favorite parts of looking at nonfiction books, is reading through the notes and seeing what where people got the information that they got. And I noticed that in a bunch of places you were with these people, with Joanne Carson, and that your knowledge, I'm sure it made me think about your knowledge of the Kennedy women and Lee Radziwill impacting the section that you wrote on her.
Right.
So
my one mistake, I don't like first person. I don't like to be there. Okay, it just I want to. I'm a writer because I like being on the edge. At a party, I hate parties unless I'm there for a purpose. If I'm there interviewing, I love the party. I'm going around working the crowd. If I have to go there to have a good time, I'm just on the edge of the party and just probably have too much to drink. But so that's, you know, so to get into this, that was the light. But the one mistake I made, so much I don't like the first person, is the epilogue of the book. I was there, and I didn't tell it in the first person because I was there. Joanne Carson was Johnny Carson's ex-wife, and Truman died in her arms in 1984. Mm-hmm. She said that Truman had told her that that his lover was to get half the ashes and Joanne was to get the other half. I don't think that's true. I think she just wanted half the ashes. She kept half the ashes. I was writing a book about Johnny Carson, and 4 years later she said that Truman, before he died, had done this tape, so how she could do the 1988 version of the black and white ball in 1965, the greatest party of the era. I don't believe that either. I think Joanne made that up because she wanted all this attention. Anyway, she invited all these people to this party, every great star in Hollywood. But she said, Larry, you can't go because if you're there and Johnny finds out, I'm going to lose my alimony. On the day of the party, she called and said, I've changed my mind. You can go, but you have to wear a very good costume. So I went to the costume store, and the only costume that was available was the executioner with this big black hood and the gloves and the plastic hatchet. So I showed up. Well, there were like 20 paparazzi there, but no stars, because they felt that Johnny would get irritated and they wouldn't get in the show. So they're all jumping up and down at me, wanting me to take off my hat. Sure, I'm some great star. So I go in there, and it's just a pathetic party. And about midnight, I leave because you're supposed to take off your mask. Right after that, Joanne comes running out of the kitchen and says, somebody's stolen Truman's ashes. They've stolen the manuscript to answered prayers. They've stolen my jewelry. Well, if that had been done to you, call the police. She didn't call the police because she made it up. And a few days later, she said, well, the ashes have been returned. And she's hysterical. So I went over with her, and we drove around trying to decide what to do with Truman's ashes. And I found out the Westwood, place in Westwood, there's a facility where Marilyn Monroe's ashes are. We went there. There were these crypts, so 36 of them, and they were all taken. But one was for Peter Lawford, and the Kennedys hadn't paid for that. So they said they would take Peter Lawford out of there and cut Joanne a good deal. She went home. She couldn't stand to part with her half of the ashes. She took out half of those. She took a quarter of Truman's ashes and 100% of her dog's ashes. And that, if you go there, it says Truman Capote, but it's 25% of Truman and 100% of the dog. So that's the story. That Truman would love that story.
He would have written something beautiful out of that.
He would have.
He would have found all the right resonances.
Right.
Do we have any questions? Christina, I can't see any questions.
There's nothing in there. So just reminding viewers.
Yeah.
Good time. You've been listening. So please, post a few questions here because you're out there. I can see you.
Yes, please ask any questions. I have to ask you, Larry, one more question is, how did you come to think of how did you think of Truman Capote when you started writing this book, and how did you think of him at the end of the book?
Well, I guess at the beginning, he was just a great writer. Of course, I'd read in Cold Blood and Breakfast at Tiffany's, and I'd seen him on all these television shows, and he was just a great character. And now I have to have this great empathy for him as this tragic figure that could have done so much. I just feel that I want the world to know what he could have been.
Mm-hmm. We've got one question, which is, do you have a favorite of these women?
Do I have a favorite? Well, I think I'm trying to think. Well, Maria Agnelli, who was an Italian princess and was married to Agnelli, Johnny Agnelli, the head of Fiat, the richest man in Italy, and they were the most powerful company in Italy. She was very interesting, very artistic and creative, and limited because of being married to this man, again, who treated her so disdainfully and put her down and said there was no such. Imagine marrying a man who says there's no such thing as love.
I cannot imagine that. I have a hard time with that. It was interesting in your section on Marella Agnelli. You wrote about how so many different layers of your life in Italy could have been, you could have been interacting with their fortune without even realizing it, that you could have been drinking a drink in your living room, driving back home in a Fiat car, then drinking a drink while watching a football game. They owned the football team, they owned the drink company, sitting on a chair that would have been shipped in from somewhere on one of their boats, and just the pervasiveness of that kind of wealth and power.
And the bottom line is, don't be envious of anybody.
Yeah.
Think if they have all this money, they're happier than you and I are. No, I think my experience, happiness is a middle class phenomenon. The poor, they're not thinking about happiness when they get up in the morning. They're thinking about getting enough money to eat, right, and pay for their apartment at the end of the month. The richer they are, I find the more unhappy people are. Just you see them in Palm Beach. The more they have, they're jealous of people are more than that. They're just never satisfied.
Two questions. One is, how long did you work on this book?
I worked about 2 years. I started it, and I had a heck of a time figuring out how to do it, and I really didn't go in to get an advance for a long time until I figured it out. And then I spent about a year writing it after that.
What were your primary sources?
My primary sources were, books, newspapers, interviews, whatever.
Any interest in a movie?
It's funny. One of the top producers, a famous name, I'm not going to embarrass him, called me about 3 weeks ago. Emailed me and said he'd like to see the book, so we sent him a copy of the book. And he emails me. He says, "Oh God, this book is so incredible! I can't believe the subtlety and how unbelievable it is. The last 40 pages I read so slowly, so it's unbelievable. I want to make a movie out of this. I'm going to talk to your agent. I'll be back to you next week." I never heard from him again.
Things move slowly sometimes.
That's what happens.
Yeah, totally.
It would make a great
movie. I think it would make an amazing movie.
I see it each chapter, do it in 8 for 8. Do each one of the Swans and Joanne. Do 8 different hours. That's what I would do.
That would be great. And Truman's in all of them.
Yeah, exactly.
Slightly differently through each of the women's experiences of them. Yeah. That would be great.
Yeah,
that'd be. I'd watch it. We'd have to think about who would do all the costumes and the set design, because that's part of what would make it so delicious to watch.
But what wonderful roles for women of a certain age, though.
Absolutely. Yeah, that would be beautiful. Okay, what are you reading right now?
What am I reading? I'm reading.
Ooh, nice.
Now he is a great writer.
Colson Whitehead.
Yeah, Colson. He's not a black writer. He's a writer who happens to be black. Okay, and his God, you talk about description. We're talking about detail, right? Talking about detail in fiction or nonfiction. His sense of detail is just unbelievable. He just gets it right every single time.
Yeah,
details. Total aside, but I remember one of my favorite books is the Book of Daniel by Dr. Wrote, and it's about the Rosenberg children and what happened to them after their parents were executed. And the parents they're with, he describes the New Yorker. At that time, when you get the New Yorker years ago, it had it came in a brown envelope it was wrapped like that, and he describes his family with all these New Yorker magazines with the folders still on them. So you see, they have these intellectual pretensions, but they never get digged. That's all you have to say. That's an example of detail that works on so many different levels.
Yep, totally. Another question is, how was Harper Lee involved with Truman, and did she ever mix with the Swans?
Well, the interesting thing about Harper Lee, first of all, is that when Truman went to Nebraska to write In Cold Blood, he went out there the first time, she went with him.
Mm-hmm.
And this was the strangest, most exotic place Truman had ever gone in his life. And it's in Nebraska at that time, having been in Iowa roughly the same time for that 3 months. It's exotic. It's exotic from the East or whatever. So they wouldn't have accepted him. Here he has this scarf down to his feet and that voice. I mean, and nobody's out. Nobody dares to be out. Nobody's gay. And so, but she comes, and she's like this woman who'll be sitting next to you in church on Sunday, right? And so she ingratiated herself with all these people, and then she introduced them to Truman, where he never would have gotten that. Plus, she was taking notes. She had almost she'd had legal training. She almost was a lawyer. It's close to finishing that, and she took all these notes. She gave him 150 pages of notes when he went off to write the book. So much of that detail is from her. So not with the Swans. You know, when To Kill a Mockingbird became such an incredible success, I think it. In some ways, it was just too much for him. How was it possible this happened to her?
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. Your chapter on them going together to research In Cold Blood and the time that he spent researching In Cold Blood was fascinating. And it really made me think about that famous Janet Malcolm quote, which is not, I mean, it doesn't necessarily apply to him perfectly because he wasn't going out there as a journalist per se. But, Janet Malcolm said that every journalist who's not too stupid or full of himself to notice what's going on knows that what he does is morally indefensible. He's a kind of confidence man preying on people's vanity, ignorance, or loneliness, gaining their trust and betraying them without remorse, which is pretty extreme. And yet...
I disagree with that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So tell me.
Well, I think that, look, there are different kinds of interviewers. Seymour Hersh, the great investigative journalist, if he called you for an interview, he would just scream at you. He'd berate you. He'd yell at you and tell you would tell him what he wants you to tell him, okay? And the other extreme, I'm another extreme. I'm incredibly empathetic to people, okay? And so I don't pretend it's a friend-like gesture, but it's not friendship. And what am I to do with that? I'm supposed to write the truth. That's I have no other reason or right unless I write the truth. So I don't think I'm betraying anything. I think I'm looking at some higher truth, really.
Yeah, but you're making a really important distinction, which is that it's a friend-like gesture, but it's not friendship. And I think a lot of people don't necessarily have the ability to differentiate between those two things.
Right. And look, it's a mutual seduction.
Mm-hmm.
When I interview somebody, I'm trying to seduce them.
Mm-hmm.
And they're trying to seduce me.
Absolutely.
So it's one less honest than the other? I don't think so.
No, it's a great point. It's a really good point. And still, when I read that chapter about In Cold Blood, I was just thinking about the ways in which Perry, exactly what you're saying. I think both of these things are true. What you're saying, that it's a mutual seduction, Perry and Truman, each of them trying to seduce the other.
Right.
Was definitely happening. And yet I think the Janet Malcolm quote has a little bit of, to me, it made me think, that chapter made me think of that quote, because I was thinking about how Perry clearly didn't know how to read the difference between friend-like and friendship, and that kind of, that game that they were playing.
Right.
And so it felt like a betrayal in the end.
Right.
So you did a great job on that chapter. I was on the edge of my seat the whole way through. It was great. Any other questions, guys? What are you watching movie-wise these days? What have you been enjoying?
Oh gosh, I don't know if I'm ruining my reputation here. I watched the Squid Game on Netflix.
Got it.
And I thought it was incredible. Daring, and this is the phenomenon around the world. That's why I wanted to watch it. Mm-hmm. And I'm ashamed to say, 3 days ago in the afternoon, I just wanted to get away from all this stuff. And I went to see the new James Bond, Time to Die. I hated it. I almost walked out. I didn't walk out because the people around me in the theater, I thought it would be embarrassing, but I'm going to have to sit and watch this. But it was just so dark and unpleasant.
Hmm. I haven't been watching anything any good. What are your writing habits like? Like what do you do? You talked about Hemingway waking up at dawn every day to write his 600 to 800 words. What's your strategy?
I get up every day and get in front of my computer in the morning and work long hours, and that's the way it is. What I would tell would-be writers is you got to realize how hard it is. You got to rewrite and go rewrite again. You have to get into it. That's your life. That's what you do.
What are you thinking about doing next?
I'm having a hard time coming up with something. I've had a whole year I haven't found something. So unless I'm driving my wife crazy without having a project. So I better come up with something fairly soon.
How do you usually come up with the next thing?
You just never know. I mean, my biggest hit was the Kennedy Women, and my agent at the time, that was her idea. And as soon as she said it, I thought nobody had ever written a multi-generational book on women at that time. I thought, wow, this is it, and sure. So I don't know, whatever. I'd be smarter if I would do like James Patterson does and have some form, some formula, and you get an audience that wants that formula and you deliver each time.
Mm-hmm.
I have to build a new audience with each one of my books. Subjects are so different.
But it keeps you moving. It keeps it interesting.
I love it. It's not for income. It's not to get another book of the bestsellers. It's to have an interesting life. And one of my favorite books is The Price of Justice, about these two Pittsburgh lawyers and their struggle against Don Blankenship, who was CEO of Massey Energy. I worked in a coal mine for a couple of months when I was young. So that to me was an incredible adventure. Yeah.
Well, what other adventures? I'd love to hear about other interesting reporting things interesting places that your reporting has led you to.
Well, I wrote a book called Ascent about Willie Unsold, who was the Peace Corps director. And I was in the Peace Corps in 64 to 66. And Willie Unsold climbed Mount Everest in 1963. Up the West Ridge. Nobody had ever gone up there before and lost none of his toes. In fact, I got lost in the jungles with him, and they took off his shoes. You could wonder how he could even walk. And he, when he was 50 or so, he felt he'd lived enough. He had a daughter called Nanda Devi, named after this mountain in India that he loved, had seen as a young man. And he was going to go over on that mountain and lead her to the top of the mountain, which had been the highest a woman had ever climbed. And then he was going to let himself die. And they went over there, and she fell in love with one of the climbers, and she got sick, and she was there within a half day of the summit, and she died in his arms. And he was the founder of Outward Bound, and decided you have to risk yourself to be alive. And they cast the body off the mountain, and he gave this prayer for this world of such fragility and beauty that even my daughter's death means my philosophy is true. And he went all around the country giving this talk, and people that really knew him knew he was a depressed man and in trouble. But 3 years later, he took a group of students. He was taught at Evergreen College in Washington. He took a group of students up my near. They weren't ready. They weren't dressed properly. And when the storm fell on the mountain, they had to come down the direct way called Cadaver Gap. And he died, and one of the students died.
Oh my gosh! What a story!
Yeah, it's quite a story. Robert Redford bought it for a movie. He went to Nepal and almost died in Nepal. And the screenplays weren't any good, so they never got made.
Yeah, it's a whole nother level of complication figuring out the screenplays.
Right.
So where are you now? Are you live between Palm Beach and DC, which are two totally different places?
Yeah, well, I used to get so depressed in the winter in Washington. Wow, I gotta go to bed. Now I go down there. I don't have a problem. I recommend that to people that have their problem in the winter. You just got to get out of there.
Yeah.
So
I live in Vermont, so it's a real winter place.
Yeah. So I just want to do a new book. That's what I want to do. That's what's gonna keep me happy.
Yeah. So I've got one last question about the book, which is that sorry, I got lost here for a moment. I asked you about how you thought about Truman differently from the beginning and the end. You said that you got interested in the book because of Babe Paley. I'm curious what you're left with at the end that what surprised you about writing about these women?
I guess how you
in your memories.
are really unhappy they were. I mean, Truman said that Bailey twice tried to commit suicide. Gloria Guinness probably committed suicide at the end. It's just the contradiction between the way they look and seem and the way their shoes are. You know?
Yeah.
Could I just say something that hasn't anything to do with this? But books and books, these independent bookstores, you and I know how crucial they are. As Barnes and Nobles has gotten smaller and smaller, and Amazon bookstore has very few books in there, very few new books. They prefer to do older books. Stores like this are a treasure beyond belief. And I've been to this store many times. And the books they have, so any author, almost, maybe they only have 1 or 2 of your books in there, but they're going to have it, and they're going to treat you fine. They love authors, they love books, and they do an immense service for South Florida.
They also know everything about all kinds of different books and genres. You can walk in and say, I really liked this book, and it can be any kind of book from any era having to do with any author. And, you know, what do you think I'd like? And they're going to tell you with total authority.
Exactly.
They're amazing. Yeah.
I think that we're going to clip this part and just like read it over and over and over again on our website.
Okay.
Thank you so much. That is such kind words.
You're going to clip the praise? You're going to
clip the praise.
Oh my God.
And I'm going to suggest that whatever you work on next is about women, because you obviously have a way with them. Maybe you can do it about women booksellers.
Yeah.
Sex and violence, right?
So anyway, this has been fascinating. And oh my God, those stories, right? Amazing stories. I've written down a lot of things. I can't wait to read the book. I haven't read it yet, but I'm looking forward to it. I want to just thank everyone for joining us. Thank you for supporting independent bookstores, for knowing their value. It has been rough, but we're hanging in there. And just a reminder that if you don't already have your copy and you want to order it from Books and Books, all you have to do is press that green button. Look at that. Oh my God. Beautiful, beautiful copy.
And there are gorgeous photos in the back too, which must be just a joy to see in the finished copy.
Yeah, they're in the middle in the finished copy.
Yeah, they're beautiful. I kept referring back to them throughout the whole book.
Congratulations on the book. I do think it will eventually either be a long form television series or a film, and that'll be really, stunning to see. And thanks for your insight. And
thanks for having me.
Oh my God. And Julia, your questions were terrific. So
thank you so much for having me, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to ask them. My God.
Thank you to everyone for watching, and you look great. You do not look like you're going to be 80 years old. You look fantastic.
Maybe I'll be writing books like this when we're approaching that age.
And may we all see each other soon in person, maybe at Books.
Exactly.
Okay. Bye, everyone. Thank you for watching.
Okay.
Thanks for
Thank you.
joining.